Chapter 8. The Chase. Hours had passed since they left the alcove. The path had grown treacherously steeper as they pushed toward the far side of the maw, and the entire time, Voidkin had been clicking and clawing along the cliffs, hunting them. Their characteristic sounds, once distant echoes that followed in their wake, had grown louder, closer too, as they reverberated across the cliff faces. They were pressing in, maybe preparing to strike. He turned toward the noise, his hand finding the Kris'thal's hilt. The blade droned urgently beneath the sheath, pulsing with a bright glow. Its rhythm was insistent, as if to say, "Get out of here!" "Damn it, the hiding rune is wearing off," Eira said, stepping beside him. The enchantment she had cast 2 turns before was disintegrating against his cloak. Kai caught the threads of magic unraveling. "We'll attract more than Voidkin if it goes," he said. The witches would come if they sensed the Kris'thal out here, exposed in the maw. The growling and chittering intensified, rising until it erupted into shrieking wails that seemed to come from every direction as the sounds bounced from one rock to another. He glanced back and froze. Shadows descended into the maw like a living storm, rolling and billowing with terrible purpose. It twisted as it closed the distance, spreading across the cliffs. "They're after us," Eira said, her voice tight. "I see them." Shapes began to emerge from the crawling void, limbs and eyes, and too many of both. Their forms flickered and shifted, half solid like firelight whipped by violent wind. They slid along the stone and screeched, splitting the air. Glowing green eyes fixed on them with burning hunger. "There's so many," Kai said. "Run, Kai!" They broke into a sprint. The path twisted and narrowed, edges crumbling into the maw with every step. Wind howled around them, carrying the acrid stench of the approaching Voidkin. Kai's lungs burned with exertion. Every breath was a struggle against the bitter wind-whipped cold. The glyphs along his gloves and boots jumped around in geometric patterns with each landed stride, absorbing the impact, giving him just enough stability to keep from falling. Behind them, the Voidkin surged forward, their bodies twisting and shifting like they were barely tethered to reality. Fast. Too fast. Kai caught glimpses from the corner of his eye, gaping mouths filled with crooked teeth, limbs that stretched impossibly far, glowing eyes that never blinked. "They're gaining," he yelled. "Not for long." Eira threw off her supply pack and veered toward the narrowest of fissures in the cliff wall. She motioned sharply. "In here!" Kai's boots skidded on loose gravel as he changed direction, barely avoiding an outcrop. He tossed his rucksack aside with barely enough time to see it tumble into the maw below. The Voidkin roared. The nearest one lunged, its limbs stretching out, claws scraping stone inches from his heels. Too close. He pushed harder, muscles screaming, and threw himself toward the fissure, his shoulders scraping against rough rock as he squeezed through. Behind him, the Voidkin lunged and slammed into an invisible barrier at the entrance. Their forms twisted and clawed at the magic, unable to force their way through. "This won't hold them long," Eira said, finishing the last flourish of an incantation. She tossed the remaining dust on her fingers. As he caught his breath, a large raven with sleek feathers perched on a nearby ledge at head height. It tilted its head and let out a sharp caw in accusation. "Shoo!" Kai yelled, waving at the bird. The raven regarded him for another moment, then gave a dismissive flutter and hopped higher up the rocks before taking to the air. "Quickly, Kai," Eira said, ahead of him. Kai grunted and shuffled deeper into the gap. The cramped space widened into a small crevice where Eira knelt, tracing runes with swift movements. "Will it hold?" he asked as he caught up. "They won't get through, but that doesn't mean they won't flank us when we come around the other side of this." Both Kai and Eira squeezed through the narrow crevice, pressing themselves against a sheer ledge on the other side. Below, the maw's darkness waited, On the other side of the fissure, the Voidkin screeched and writhed, struggling to navigate around the fissure without falling into the crevasse. But the creatures weren't retreating at all. They were merging, their bodies melding into a nebula of shadow. Limbs twisted, bones snapped into new configurations, and then there were wings. The Voidkin fused into the shape of a massive bird. Claws stretched into talons. The glow of hundreds of emerald eyes combined into one blazing beacon at its core. The massive creature's head reared back. A piercing screech erupted from its beak, sharp and otherworldly. The pitch made Kai's skull ring. "It's taking flight!" he yelled. Eira sucked in a breath. "Voidhawk!" The massive bird launched itself into the air with an ungainly leap, its wings beating awkwardly at first before finding their rhythm. Shadows peeled away from its body as it soared, talons outstretched, its green eye fixed on them. Eira moved. Her hand shot up, fingers tracing a rapid pattern in the air. "Brathisus kelhaif kelaisvus," she shouted. Fire erupted along the Voidhawk's wings, bright, searing orange that tore through the shadow like burning parchment. The creature shrieked, its form convulsing as the flames consumed the darkness holding it together. Kai threw himself to the side as the burning mass careened past, barely missing him. It slammed into the cliff ledge above, sending tremors through the stone. The Voidhawk exploded. Voidkin burst from the collapsing mass, most tumbling into the maw below, their forms vanishing into darkness. Others scrambled free, reforming into smaller shapes that scuttled forward with relentless hunger. "Keep moving!" Eira pulled him deeper into the passage. Kai followed. Behind them, the smaller Voidkin were already pursuing, claws grasping for purchase. "Don't slow down," Eira said. "Don't let them close in." Kai gritted his teeth and reached for the pouch at his side. He pulled out a handful of rune-inscribed Persilium rocks, turned, and flung them into the ground. "Elithis vus ka Persiliferos." The rocks exploded in flashes of light. Glowing threads stretched like a web across the narrow passage, latching onto the Voidkin's forms. The creatures screeched as the threads burned into shadow. Some of the creatures dissolved entirely, wafting into vapor. Others struggled against the snares, unable to advance. "Clever," Eira called back. "Keep running." Kai couldn't answer, his breath coming in ragged bursts as they plunged deeper. Gradually, though, the sounds began to fade. The Voidkin's chittering and shrieking grew distant, echoing somewhere far behind them in the passage. Then, silence. Kai and Eira slowed, then stopped, leaning against the stone wall. Kai's chest heaved. His legs burned. Sweat dripped down his face despite the cold. The quiet was worse than the noise. Without the creature's cries, he could hear everything else, his own ragged breathing, the hammering of his heart, and the faint drip of water somewhere in the dark. After 3 hours at a good pace, the abyssal maw joined the collection of horrible things looming on the periphery of Kai's senses behind him. Kai glanced back, half expecting writhing shadows or glowing eyes, but the passage remained still and empty. For the first time since entering the maw, the Voidkin felt truly gone. "Stay alert, Kai," Eira said quietly. "I'm always alert," though his tone betrayed the lie. "But you're telling me to be alert, which means you're expecting something. What's ahead?" The narrow path suddenly widened, and Kai stopped. The ruins of Oasi'vros were visible where the Nightshawl waned, stretching in the distance ahead of him, vast and broken. Monolithic spires of fractured glass and crumbling stone jutted skyward, glinting faintly against the Nightshawl's dim churn. Shattered domes and collapsed bridges littered the expanse. Pools of stagnant water ahead of him reflected the broken skyline as thin mist clung stubbornly to their surfaces. Veins of prismir snaked along the land, leading up into the ruins, cracked, dark, and depleted. The plains before the city were silent except for the wind moving along the rubble that littered the ground as far as the eye could see. A raven circled overhead, its caw echoing across the ruins. The same raven? Kai couldn't be sure. Even here, amidst the desolation, at least something could thrive. Eira stepped forward as she scanned the fractured skyline. "Oasi'vros," she said quietly, pointing. "That's where we're headed. And from here it's deceptively far. We may need to camp out the next vale before reaching it." "And the Voidkin?" Kai asked, looking back once more. "The Voidkin aren't pursuing us anymore," she said, "and yet the Kris'thal calls like a beacon to them. That only means one thing. The witches have ordered them to stay back." That made Kai hesitate. Wait, they know where we are? They must know. The rune that hid the Kris'thal burned its last thread shortly after we outran the last horde. His gut tied itself into a knot. He forced himself to think. And the witches didn't come themselves. That means... They've set a trap, Eira finished. Yes. Kai's eyes narrowed. How can you be so sure? Her gaze flicked toward him. Because it's what I would do. The certainty in her voice made him cold. Then we turn back, he said. And do what? She replied. Tell Korik what we saw, so that he can come and... No. Her voice went sharp. This is your tread. And the Kris'thal is your claim, not Korik's. But if he told me that if I got into any trouble, then I'd... Kai. Always forward. What if they were walking straight into an ambush? What if the witches were waiting in the ruins right now, watching them approach like mice to a trap? He'd barely survived one witch with Eira's help. How many would be waiting this time? Kai's confidence was waning. But Eira, what if they... Sacrifice it. She turned to face him fully. That's what my mother would say. Sacrifice the part of you that holds you back. Put a dagger through its heart. The words hit hard. Sacrifice what? Your doubt, she said simply. It'll kill you faster than the witches ever could. He stared at her, the echoes of her words tangling with the insistent hum of the Kris'thal at his side. Think about it, Kai. If we go back through the maw, we're as good as dead. The Voidkin will overwhelm us. You can't give in to doubt. Dig deep within yourself and find the courage to go on. Doubt had been with him since the beginning, a presence that loitered at the edge of every choice, and yet here he stood, having outrun a cloud of Voidkin. Why did it still cling to him now? Hadn't he proved his capability many times over? He slowed his breathing. With each measured breath, the tight coil in his chest loosened until he understood what he'd been holding on to, an uncertainty that he no longer needed to carry. He let it go, imagining it lifting from him, scattering into the cool wind. I can do this, he said at last. A smolder of determination sparked in his eyes as he lifted them to meet Eira's face. But if we're walking into a trap, we're going to spring it on them before they can close it around us. Eira nodded once. Good. Now you're thinking like a rune runner.